The suitcase zipped shut like a closing argument. Bryce didn't look at me. Not once. Just smoothed the collar of his jacket like he had someplace important to be. "I need to focus on my family now," he said, as if I hadn't been his family once. As if 28 years of scraped knees, late-night fevers, and second jobs didn't count anymore. He paused at the door waiting for guilt, maybe, for tears. But I only stirred my tea slowly, the spoon clinking against porcelain. The door slammed. The windows barely rattled. I didn't rush to the window to watch him go. I didn't reach for my phone. I just sat, let the silence settle. It wasn't the first time he'd left, but it was the first time I hadn't followed. The mug in my hand was old, chipped at the rim. It used to belong to my husband. Bryce never liked it, said it was too plain. But I kept it anyway. It held heat better than the newer ones. I glanced at the account app on my phone. One final check, just to confirm. $4.13. He'd really done it. Transferred every cent he could find in the joint account. Rent money, grocery money, the little buffer I kept for surprise dental visits. All gone. I closed the app and reached for the sugar tin. Empty. I drank the tea, bitter. It didn't bother me. The clock ticked steady and unimpressed. I stared at the worn spot on the table where Bryce used to press his spelling books, flat. That little dip in the wood still caught crumbs. He used to hate that. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd been expecting this version of him since the first time he called me overly dramatic for asking where the money was going. The envelope was still in the drawer. The one labeled, "For later." I slid it closer. Not to open it yet, just to feel its weight. Some things needed to be done while the tea was still warm. It started with good intentions, or at least that's what I told myself. 3 years ago, Bryce sat across from me at the kitchen table, all charm and ambition, telling me how easier it would be to just have one place for bills, groceries, and anything that might come up. He called it a modern solution, said it made no sense to keep things separate anymore. "For emergencies, Mom," he said, tapping the pen against the paper. "This way, if something happens to you, I can handle it." He smiled like he was doing me a favor. I hesitated. I asked if he'd be open to joint authorization dual signatures for large transfers. He laughed. "Mom, no one does that anymore. You're being paranoid." Maybe I was. Or maybe I'd just lived longer. So I agreed. I signed the forms. Let the account be opened in both our names. But what I didn't tell him was this: it wasn't my main account. Not the one where my pension landed every month. Not the one where I'd slowly transferred my late husband's annuity bit by bit until it was safe. No, this one was for show. I let him make the transfers. Let him feel like he was managing something. Let him talk about consolidation and efficiency like he'd invented the words. He thought he was being clever, but I was the one who used to balance ledgers by hand with a calculator no bigger than a cigarette case. I've seen charmers before. I married one. And buried him too. Bryce moved money in and out of that joint account like it was his personal wallet. I watched every transaction. I said nothing, because I wanted to see how far he'd go. And now I knew. I rinsed the mug and set it on the rack to dry. Walked back to the drawer, opened it, and pulled out the brown envelope. The real numbers were inside. So were the next steps. The grocery store was colder than usual, the kind of cold that made the floor tiles feel harder under my shoes. I only needed a few things: milk, onions, a loaf of bread, but habit made me take a cart anyway. Old routines die slow. At the checkout, I placed the items carefully on the belt. The cashier greeted me, scanning each one with the soft beeps that always reminded me of heart monitors. When she read me the total, I reached for my card, the same one I'd used for years without thinking twice. Declined. She tried again. Declined. "I can try another register," she offered gently. "No," I said, taking the card back. "It's fine." It wasn't fine, but the embarrassment wasn't hers to share. I stepped aside, letting the next customer move forward. One by one, I returned the groceries to their shelves, the milk sweating cold in my hand as I set it back. The bread felt lighter than usual. Or maybe I just felt heavier. Outside, the sun was too bright. I took out my phone and dialed Bryce. Straight to voicemail. I called again and again until I could picture exactly where the phone was sitting somewhere in his apartment screen, down ignored. He always said he was busy, but I knew the difference between busy and unavailable by choice. I sat on a bench near the bus stop and called the bank instead. The representative pulled up my account, her tone turning careful midway through. Mrs. Voss? I see multiple withdrawals and charges from this week. All from Fairfield. Fairfield. His city. 40 miles away. Not a single one from mine. Do you recognize these transactions? She asked. Yes, I said. Though it wasn't recognition, it was confirmation. I hung up and sat for a moment, letting the sounds of traffic settle around me. A bus hissed to a stop, but I didn't get on. Instead, I stood, tightened my coat around me, and began the walk home. My keys jingled softly in my pocket, the only noise I made. The house waited at the end of the street, steady still, exactly where I'd left it. And as I walked up the front steps, I knew this was only the beginning of what needed to come next. I didn't take my coat off when I came in. The cold from outside clung to me, but it was better than the kind of cold that had settled inside. I went straight to the drawer in the hallway. Bottom left. Always locked, always ignored. I unlocked it, fingers steady, and pulled out the brown envelope I hadn't touched in years. The words, "for later," were written in black ink, faded but clear. It wasn't some emergency stash. It wasn't a last-minute lifeline. It was the plan. Not a backup, the plan. Inside were papers carefully ordered, the deed to the house, still in my name alone. Copies of bonds my husband and I bought back when Bryce still wore Velcro shoes. The trust agreement notarized, signed untouched by Bryce's name. There was also the card. Cream-colored, embossed with the name of a lawyer I'd met just once. I remembered what he said. Set it up now while things are quiet. When it's loud, it'll be too late. I'd listened. I always listened. When Bryce first started asking questions about helping manage things, I knew where that road might lead. Not because he was cruel, but because he was careless. Carelessness is its own kind of harm. I laid everything out on the table, read through the documents slowly like it was the first time. Nothing had changed. The trust remained solid. The conditions were still intact. He couldn't touch it. Not now. Not later. I folded the documents back into place, slipped them inside the envelope, and sealed it with a paperclip. There would be no need to change anything, not yet. What I needed now wasn't a pen or a signature. It was time. Time to let him believe what he thought he'd done would stand. Time to watch what people do when they think you have nothing left. I tucked the envelope beneath my coat, crossed the room, and placed it inside the safe behind the laundry door. Then I sat down and began writing a list, not out of anger, but out of habit. Bryce was coming back. I could feel it. It was a Sunday. Quiet. I had just poured coffee when I heard the car pull into the driveway too fast, too confident. I didn't look through the window. I didn't need to. I knew the rhythm of his footsteps. He knocked once, then opened the door like he still lived here. "Hey, Mom," Bryce said, grinning like we'd just spoken yesterday. "Thought I'd stop by, see if you needed help with anything. You know, downsizing. Downsizing." That word sat in the air like steam that wouldn't rise. He stepped aside and motioned to someone behind him. A young woman followed in. Red lipstick, sharp nails, and a smile she wore like armor. "This is Kaylee," he said. "She's been helping me think through some ideas. Real estate stuff." Kaylee waved like we were old friends. "Hi, Mrs. Voss. I've heard so much about this place. It's got real potential, especially for a multi-gen setup. We could knock down the wall between the kitchen and den, maybe add a separate entrance. Young families love that." She didn't pause long enough for me to answer. Bryce chimed in. Yeah, we figured you wouldn't mind staying in the smaller back room. You hardly use the space up front anyway. I didn't answer. Just sipped my coffee and watched the two of them talk like they were reading from a script. They didn't notice the half-folded deed in the basket by the table. They didn't see the envelope tucked beside the safe key. They didn't ask how I'd been. I nodded, politely, walked to the door and held it open. Wait now, Kaylee asked, blinking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Bryce's face shifted. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The charm was slipping. They stepped outside. I shut the door behind them and locked it. From the window, I watched their car back out. Kaylee gestured with her hands. Bryce didn't look back. The next morning, I called the lawyer. The lawyer's office hadn't changed much. Same walnut shelves, same ticking clock that seemed louder in quiet moments. I sat across from him with my folder already open. I'd like to update the will, I said plainly. And lock the trust. He's no longer a beneficiary. He didn't ask who. He just nodded. We went line by line. The house, the bonds, the payout provisions, the successor trustees. Everything carefully written once with love and now rewritten with clarity. Would you like to leave anything in his name? He asked, pausing over a clause. No, I said, then added, not even the photos. I'll keep those separate. He made a note. We can structure this so the trust is sealed. He won't even know it exists. Perfect. Next we closed the decoy account. The one Bryce drained, thinking it was everything I had. I watched the teller shut it down with 2 clicks. No sentiment. Then I opened another under a new trust name, with the new attorney listed as administrator. The only access tied to me and one charity I'd quietly supported for years. The paperwork was clean. It felt like wiping a chalkboard and writing in ink. Back in the lawyer's office, I signed the final page. He pressed his hands together and gave me a long look. You're not the first mother to do this. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But it never gets easier, does it? No, he said, but it does get quieter. When I got home, I changed the locks. Not just the front and back, but the side gate too. I made a list of every account that needed updating. One by one, I made the calls. By the time the sun went down, the name Bryce Voss had been removed from every line that mattered. The only thing left with his name on it was a letter unopened in a drawer dated 2 years ago. I didn't need to read it anymore. I had one more place to go. The woman from the housing co-op shook my hand in the driveway. She didn't ask why I wanted a quick sale. She'd seen enough women like me older polite and finished explaining. They took care of everything. The inspection, the documents, the signatures. I asked only for 1 clause lifetime tenancy, private untouched. They agreed. No fanfare, no sign in the yard, just paperwork and a wire transfer that didn't go anywhere Bryce could find. The car went next. I donated it to a local church program, handed over the keys, and walked home without looking back. Then came the utilities. I made the calls in a single afternoon, canceling, rerouting, disconnecting. My name disappeared from databases faster than I expected. I left the landline active but changed the voicemail. No more. This is the Voss residence. Just silence after the beep. I kept a few things, the safe, my books, the tea mugs. Everything else, furniture, linens, framed photos, I let go. The co-op would repurpose the house for someone else. Maybe a young family. Maybe someone starting over too. By Thursday, I had moved into the back unit. Quiet, smaller, private. Still part of the same property, but tucked away with a separate entrance and its own mailbox. I didn't leave the neighborhood, I just stopped being visible in it. 3 days later, Bryce came back. I heard the knock from across the garden. He knocked hard, then rang, then shouted my name. The front porch light never came on. I stood at my kitchen window far enough back that he couldn't see. He paced the driveway, then checked under the mat for the spare key that hadn't been there in years. Eventually, he left. I didn't watch the car pull out. I just listened to the engine fade into distance and let the kettle boil. The next day, the voicemails started. The first voicemail came the same evening he found the house empty. His voice was tight, controlled the way he sounded when he thought he was being reasonable. "Mom, call me back. We need to talk." The second message was shorter. "Where are you?" By morning, the tone had shifted. No greeting, no pause. "This isn't funny. You can't just disappear." I played each one only once, then saved them. Not out of sentiment. Documentation matters, especially when someone begins rewriting their version of the truth. By the end of the week, the angry voicemails arrived. The kind spoken too fast, breathed too loud. "I know you're there. You're being ridiculous. You can't just leave a house like that. You owe me a conversation." He didn't say what he really wanted, but I heard it anyway. Money always has a sound, even when no one names it. Then came the calls from blocked numbers. Unknown numbers. Local numbers I didn't recognize. He tried every angle, every pressure point. He wanted a slip, a reaction, any sign I was still where he thought I should be. But I never blocked him. That's the part people never understand. Blocking is emotional. Avoidance is emotional. Silence is administrative, practical, clean. I let every call ring, let every voicemail land. Then, once a day, I sat at the small desk by the window, logged the date, and time-printed each transcript the phone carrier generated and slipped the pages into a new envelope labeled in neat handwriting for reference. The stack thickened faster than I expected. Some messages were pleading. Some were sharp enough to cut through the quiet of my small kitchen. Others were empty breaths, as if he'd dialed without knowing what to say. I read none of them twice. Late one evening, as I poured hot water over a fresh tea bag, the phone rang again. Same number. Same insistence. I let it echo through the room until it stopped. Then I opened my planner and circled Sunday. I already knew what I needed to do next. I wake before the sun now, not because I have to, but because I can. There's a soft quiet in the early hours that feels earned. No alarms. No obligations. Just stillness and the rustle of leaves outside the small window above the sink. The kettle whistles once gently. I pour, sip, sit. Most mornings, I walk. Just a few blocks, sometimes farther if the air is cool. I pass the bakery but don't go in too expensive now, and besides, I bake my own. The same neighbor waves each time. We never speak, just smile. That's enough. A cat gray with one torn ear has started waiting near my steps. I don't feed him, but he follows me sometimes. I call him Leonard, not aloud, just in my head. He doesn't belong to anyone. That makes two of us. The money's not much, but it's honest. My accounts are lean, but I know every penny. No surprises, no shadows. There's something clean about that. About knowing what's yours and what was never meant to be taken. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I volunteer at the library. I shelve books, dust shelves, help the children pick out picture books for their reading logs. They call me Miss Marlene, and I let them. No one there knows I had a son. I prefer it that way. I've learned how to be quiet without feeling erased. I don't open the old photo albums. I don't replay conversations that didn't end right. I don't wonder if he's sorry. If he is, he'll carry that weight. If he's not, I've already put mine down. There are still moments. A passing boy with Bryce's walk. A laugh that sounds too familiar. But they come like fog. Soft, fast, and gone. Before I can touch them, I don't chase them anymore. The planner sits open on the table. Sunday is circled. Not for him. For me. It's the first day of the month and I've made a decision. One last change. One final lock. Thanksgiving morning came with a thin frost on the grass and the sound of someone else's family clattering dishes in a nearby unit. I stood at my window for a moment, watching a balloon slip loose from a child's hand and drift up unbothered by wind or weight. Inside the table was already set. One plate, one cup, one chair left empty, not because someone forgot, but because I chose not to fill it. I made myself a simple meal. Nothing grand. A roasted chicken thigh with rosemary from the planter box, a scoop of mashed potatoes and green beans sautéed with garlic. I had a small slice of pie cooling on the windowsill, just enough to mark the day. It wasn't about the food. It never had been. I sat at the table, folded my hands, and breathed in the stillness. That chair had once been Bryce's. He used to kick it with his heel when he was bored. Used to lean back on two legs until I warned him he'd fall. He never listened. Maybe he still doesn't. But today, the chair stayed put, upright. Empty. I didn't miss the noise. I didn't miss the performance of pretending we were fine. The silence in the room wasn't hollow, it was whole. The deed to the property, tucked neatly in my desk drawer, bore only my name. The bank account, balanced and modest, had no fingerprints but mine. Everything in my world now began and ended with me. And that wasn't lonely. It was honest. I poured myself a cup of tea and looked out at the quiet street. No cars in the driveway. No son arriving late. No forced apology. No girlfriend with bright teeth and big ideas. Just me. Leonard curled beneath the bench outside, and the wind slipping past without needing to explain itself. I didn't toast to anything. I just ate. When I finished, I cleared my place, washed the dishes, and turned off the lights. Some things don't need closing statements. Some goodbyes don't need to be said aloud. Because sometimes, the most powerful answer is never saying a word at all.